Hello everyone and welcome back to another video where today I want to talk about a quote from Carole Ford that basically all but confirms the scene at the end of the reality war that was supposed to be. Not the version of the reality war that we saw, where we saw Ncuti Gatwa sacrifice himself and regenerate into Billy Piper, but instead the original version, which, if you don't know, basically described a scene where there was basically a party and Susan would be looking off in the distance, teasing a season 3. That was what the original ending was purported to be, and now we have Carole Ford basically coming out and confirming that yes, that basically was the ending that they had planned. And yeah, we're going to be reading this because it's very interesting. Obviously, the BBC and the production team have obviously ran with the narrative that this was always the plan, this was always, what they were going to do with it. Obviously, we all know it wasn't, but it's funny seeing an actual star of the show confirm this now as well. Obviously, previously to this, we've also had the mother of the baby Sienna, who played Poppy, on TikTok basically saying that this, this scene was real, or this scene did exist. So, yeah, it's just more evidence, really. But subscribe if you're new, that would be greatly appreciated. And let's dive right in. Carole Ford describes unused Doctor Who finale scene. Actress Carole Ford, who plays the Doctor's granddaughter Susan, described an unused scene she filmed for the Doctor Who Season 2 finale, The Reality War, while being interviewed by fellow Doctor Who actress at Club Parramatta in Sydney, Australia, on 12th of October 2025. It's interesting that I'm only hearing about this now, considering that the panel was on the 12th. I'm assuming maybe there wasn't, maybe recording allowed in there or something. Manning introduced the question of Susan's origins by asking Ford about her Doctor Who character Susan. Did you know who your mummy was? Ford answered by describing a scene which she filmed with Sienna Robin Mavanga Phipps, who played the Doctor and Belinda's Verada Sethu's daughter Poppy, brought into being by a wish. You didn't see the episode, which was sort of to introduce my coming back, where I was holding hands with a little beautiful tiny black child, 3 years old, and we were watching through the window somewhere where the audience weren't supposed to know where we were supposed to be. And we were watching my newly embodied grandfather, who was now Ncuti Gatwa, and watching him have a wonderful time, singing and dancing in a party in a shop opposite where we were. And obviously my character Susan, was longing to just go down there, fling her arms around her and say, "Grandfather, how lovely to see you after all this time, and how did you just survive your floating in space, and why have you changed?" A still from the cutscene showing the Doctor and Belinda at a party was curiously posted for the finale episode, The Reality War, on Disney+. Anyway, that was unfortunately not to be, for reasons I know and will not disclose, Ford continued. The reason may very well be the reshoots that happened in early 2025, at a residence in Penarth, Wales, which obviously was the scene which, we see here, which was the Doctor with the new life with Belinda and obviously Poppy being her child. That doesn't seem to be the ending here that was intended. And it's interesting because the way in which Carole Ford was asked this question, Katie Manning says, "Do you know who Susan's mum and dad are?" And she says, she talks about Sienna, she talks about Poppy, seemingly confirming the ongoing kind of theory or rumour that Poppy was intended to be the mother of Susan, the original, mother of Susan, who eventually would have her in some capacity. That seems to be what they were going to do for Season 3. So the reason why it seems so out of the blue when Belinda, has this child, which was never really on the cards for her character, is because that wasn't meant to be who Poppy was at all. She was meant to be the child of the Doctor who would eventually go on to have Susan. That's basically confirmed through this now. She's basically said as much. That's what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be them looking onwards at the Doctor, basically confirming that yes, she would be the mother of Susan. Now, would this have worked? I don't know. I think it does sound a bit fan fiction to me. It does sound a little bit weird, and I don't love the idea of giving Carole Ford Susan a definitive, "Oh yeah, this is her mum." I think that part of the mystery surrounding Susan is the fact that we don't really know, the Doctor's family lineage. And I already kind of feel that things like The Timeless Child have gone too far in revealing stuff about the Doctor that I don't really think we needed to know. And I think that this would be a further extension of that, if that makes sense. However, having said that, thematically, it would have made a lot more sense with the Season 2 we got than what ended up happening. Obviously, this entire 2 series even, you know, season 1 and 2, were about the Doctor basically coming to terms with family and the idea of family and the idea of, you know, reuniting with family. And obviously he learns that through Ruby and her wanting to meet her mum again. So that was obviously supposed to lead to him re-embracing Susan as his one surviving relative, or at least so that he thinks. That's obviously what this era was supposed to culminate in. When you look at the themes of both series, it makes perfect sense. But instead, because of the untimely exit of Gatwa and all of the issues surrounding Disney, what we have is something that has the elements of that and some of the thematic elements of family and stuff like that, but that just don't lead to where you think they would. Like, again, I'm not saying that, you know, her being Susan's mum would have been great, but on a thematic level, it would have made significantly more sense. It would have explained why Susan randomly starts showing back up again. It would explain, you know, the whole thing about, you know, the Doctor wishing Poppy was his kid in Space Babies because she was. That's the whole point. Like, that's the whole point of the story arc that they were doing. And because of outsider factors, because of Gatwa leaving, because of Disney dragging their feet, that's had to have been completely rewritten. And again, it's not to say that, like, this would have been necessarily fantastic, or that this era was going to be great if this was done. I still think that the idea itself is fairly dubious, in my opinion. Maybe it could have worked, we'll never know. But I do think it shows that when people talk about this era, it's very important to recognise that this era was not what it was supposed to be. By that I mean, it's very evident that what they were trying to build with this sort of run of episodes has not culminated in the way that they wanted it to. So when people will point out, you know, the Billy Piper decision and say, oh, you know, this is, you know, maybe like reductive and I don't really like it, and I don't really like the Billy Piper decision, I still don't. It's important to recognise that that wasn't their first instinct. Do you know what I mean? That wasn't their first choice. It's where they ended up. And even then, I would still say that you could have done other things. You could have had it fade to black. You could have had anything else. You could have had it cut to 14. You know, there's other things you could have done. I'm more sympathetic in the sense that it so obviously wasn't meant to go like this. And so therefore, when people say, oh yeah, but you know, Reality War did this and that, it's like, yeah, but it wasn't supposed to. Obviously, I get why people say it like that, because that is what we were delivered on screen. We can only really kind of critique what we saw on screen, and I have done. You know, Reality War is probably one of my least favourite episodes of Doctor Who, being completely transparent. But like, you know, it's obviously not meant to go the way that it did, and I would be interested to see a version where that original ending is intact. I don't think we'll ever see it, because the BBC are very committed to saying, no, this was always the plan, you know, this was always what we were going to do. Ncuti was always going to leave after, you know, this number of seasons, which obviously we know he wasn't. You know, the narrative there is so obviously not true that, like, you know, it's not even worth pointing out. Having Carole Ann Ford herself basically say, yeah, I was supposed to basically be Poppy's daughter, and that was going to be my entry back in. I mean, I don't know what else you want me to say. That's just confirming what we all thought for ages. I do hope that whenever the show does come back, you know, in whatever form it does come back, one of the first things on the docket is resolving something with Susan. You know, that was built up across 2 series. And let's be honest, you know, and I've said this before, but, you know, it is just a sad fact that Carole Ann Ford is not going to be with us forever. And she so clearly, you know, has wanted to come back for so long, and we almost got there. You know, we almost got to the point where Susan was properly back in the show, and because of behind-the-scenes stuff, it got scuppered. And I hope that in whatever capacity the show comes back, you know, whoever the Doctor is, that's number one on the priority list, is sorting that out, and sorting out all of that stuff, because otherwise I think it'll be an enormous missed opportunity, and I think it'll be something that we regret, you know, going forward, is not having finally seen the Doctor reunite with Susan while we could do that, while Carole Ann Ford was still with us. But let me know what you guys think. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.